Before he died, Thomas McBride wrote his wife a letter, not a goodbye, a map. He told her exactly where to go, who to trust, and how to survive. He wrote it calmly at his desk, knowing he was running out of time. He never told her he was afraid. He just made sure she had everything she needed for the road ahead. The question is, how far did she have to walk before she understood what he'd given her? Welcome to a channel built around the stories the West whispered, but never forgot. Love that survives loss, courage that lives in quiet rooms, the kindness of strangers on the hardest roads. The greatest gift a person can leave behind isn't money or land. It's a path they carved in the dark so the people they loved wouldn't have to find it alone. Hit subscribe and tell me in the comments, has someone ever quietly prepared the road ahead of you without you knowing?
Cole Hargrove had one simple rule. He never used the East Ridge Road in December. It was a dead-end trail leading straight to the Piton mine. Only folks with mine business or folks running from it ever went up there. Cole was neither. He was just checking a fence line. But his old dog, Deputy, a 13-year-old hound who moved like he remembered every ache and pain he ever had, started pulling hard to the left. And Cole had learned a long time ago not to argue with that dog's gut. He smelled the wrecked wagon before he laid eyes on it. Wet canvas and the sharp scent of splintered pine. His horse stopped dead, ears pinned back. Down the slope, Cole saw her. A woman on her knees in the snow, her arms wrapped tight around two small children. Her dark coat was spread over them like the last bit of shelter on earth. Her head was up, watching those lanterns on the ridge. Cole sat his horse for 3 steady seconds, his mind working like it used to. He saw it all, plain as day. 3 lanterns in a sweep pattern, not a search. They weren't looking for her. They were closing in. She knew it too. She wasn't screaming for help. She was playing the same odds he was, hoping the snow would cover her tracks before the light found her. He could have just turned his horse around and checked that fence. Nobody had seen him. But then Deputy, his old dog, let out a low noise, a sound that said he'd already made up his mind and was just waiting for Cole to get with the program. The little girl peeked out from her brother's coat and her eyes met Cole's through the falling snow. She didn't cry or reach for him. She just watched with the steady gaze of a child who knows something terrible is happening and has decided to face it head on. That settled it. Cole swung down from his horse. "Ma'am," he said, keeping his voice low. "Don't you move. I'm coming down slow." Her head turned. He saw the set of her shoulders, tight with the pain she was refusing to feel. "How many?" she asked, her voice flat. Not a question, just a need for facts. "3 up on the ridge," he answered. "There are 2 more down south," she said, her breath catching for a second. "They're aiming to cut off the creek road." Cole looked south and saw she was right. A 4th lantern flickered through the trees. In the dark, with a busted shoulder and 2 kids to protect, she had already mapped their whole strategy. He tucked that piece of information away. "My ranch is about 1.5 miles west of here. There's a path through a draw where they can't see us," he said, crouching beside her. "But we need to move in the next 4 minutes, or we lose our chance." Her eyes were brown and clear, and they were sizing him up just like he was sizing her up. "You live here alone?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "Then why are you stopping for us?" It was the right question. "Because if I ride on," he said, meeting her gaze, "and I hear tomorrow what happened to you and your kids, I won't sleep right for the rest of my life. And ma'am, I don't sleep well enough as it is." He glanced at her shoulder, seeing how it hung wrong. "That shoulder needs setting." For a moment she just held his gaze. Then she turned to her son. "James," she said softly, "take your sister's hand." The boy, who couldn't be more than 9, gave Cole one long measuring look before taking his little sister's hand without a single word. They made their way through the draw, with Cole leading his horse, keeping himself between the family and the ridge line. The woman, Eleanor, walked without a bit of help, even though he offered his arm twice. The third time, when her foot broke through the snow and she stumbled, she grabbed his sleeve just long enough to get her balance back. She let go quick, like a person who'd had a lot of practice not holding on. The little girl, who he learned was named Clara, looked up at his horse. "What's her name?" "Pepper," Cole said. "That's a good name," Clara replied. Then she pointed her chin toward the old hound. "Deputy is a good name, too." "How'd you know his name?" Cole asked, surprised. "He just looks like a deputy," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. When they reached his ranch, the cabin was cold and dark, but the stove caught quick, and soon he had blankets from a cedar chest his mother had sent. Blankets he'd never had a reason to use before. Clara was asleep before the first blanket even settled over her. Her brother James sat straight-backed beside her, his eyes never leaving Cole. He was a boy who'd been the man of the house for too long. Eleanor sat at the table, a leather satchel in her lap that she had never once put down. Cole set a cup of hot water in front of her. "Your shoulder needs to go back in," he said gently. "Just do it," she whispered. He reset it with one clean, quick motion. She made a single, sharp sound, and then it was over. Later, after the children were sound asleep, he finally asked about the bag. This was the moment of truth. She opened it, and it wasn't full of money or jewels. It was filled with books, a teaching certificate, and a deed. Her husband had been a partner at the mine. When he passed, the other partners tried to steal his share. She ran with the only things that mattered, proof of what was hers and the tools to build a new life. Then she went quiet. James never took his eyes off his little sister. He had heard the awful sound, but he chose to watch Clara instead. That told Cole this boy had seen too many bad things for his age. "Thank you," Eleanor said, her voice steady. "What's your name, ma'am?" "Eleanor McBride." She carefully flexed the fingers on her arm. "My husband was Thomas McBride. He handled the books for Peton Mining." She stared at the popping fire. "He is dead. It happened 8 months ago in shaft number 3. Her voice was hard and flat, like ice over deep water. "They called it an accident. That company is real good at having accidents." Cole sat down across from her. "So, where are you folks headed?" "There is a federal land office in Billings," she explained, "and a judge, Alderman Price. My husband trusted a man who said the judge could not be bought by Piton." She looked down at her bag. "I have Thomas's notebook. He wrote it all down. 4 years of names, dates, and payments. Everything Piton did wrong." She looked right at Cole, including what happened at Coleville. That name hit him like it always did, opening a door to a room he tried to keep sealed shut. "What do you know about Coleville?" he asked her. "I know 7 men died, and the company was found to have done nothing wrong." She reached into her bag and laid a folded piece of newspaper on the table. "I know a Pinkerton detective named Cole Hargrove wrote the first report, and it pointed the finger right at Peton. I also know that report got buried deep, and Hargrove quit his job rather than sign his name to a lie." She did not look at the paper. She looked straight at him. "My husband believed your report was the God's honest truth. He kept a copy of it, and he kept your name." Cole didn't reach for the newspaper. "How long have you known who I was?" he asked. "Since you said your name back on that ridge, I knew it right away. Thomas made me memorize the names of everyone involved just in case something bad happened to him." She paused for a moment. "He was a careful man. He had to be. Men like Piton do not leave loose ends." "No, they sure do not." She put her hand flat on the table. Her knuckles were raw and scraped. "They left my Thomas in that shaft and said he was careless. They have been sending men after me for 4 days, all because I took this notebook instead of just crying quietly." Her jaw set hard. "I am done crying quietly." Cole looked at her, at the faint ink stains on her right hand from so much writing. He saw how she sat at the table with a clear path to the door. She had a good view of the window. And he saw how she touched that leather bag without even thinking about it, the way a person touches something they have sworn to protect. "There is a federal marshal named Garrett," he said. "He rides this whole Northern Territory. He ain't owned by nobody because he is too stubborn and too mean to be bought." Cole paused. "I know how to get a message to him." Eleanor just stared. "Why would you do that?" she asked. It was the same question she had asked on the ridge, in the very same way. She was not suspicious or thankful, just asking. She was a woman who had learned the hard way not to expect kindness. Cole looked at the faded newsprint with his own name on it. He remembered the night his boss handed him the fake report and told him to sign. He had not felt angry, just tired. He was tired of being a cog in a machine that chewed people up and called it progress. He had walked out that night telling himself that was enough. He had been lying to himself for 2 long years. "Your husband kept 7 names in his notebook," Cole said. "The men from Coleville. I put those same names in my first report, but someone took them out. They were not in any official record or newspaper." He met her eyes. "How did Thomas get them?" Eleanor was silent for a second. "He went to the families," she said softly. "He spent 3 months finding the family of every single man who died. He wrote down everything they told him." She paused again. "He said somebody should have done it a long time ago." Cole sat there quietly for a good while. Outside, the blizzard was howling, pressing against the little cabin like it planned on staying forever. But the fire inside held strong. Deputy, the old dog, had moved from the corner to the foot of Clara's bed like he had found his post for the night. "You need to get some sleep," Cole finally said. "I have to get to Billings. The pass has been snowed in since Sunday. You are not going anywhere for at least 3 days, maybe 5. He stood up. "You need rest. Your children need rest. And in the morning, you need a hot meal. Then you can tell me everything in that notebook so we can move smart when the time comes." She studied his face, searching for any hidden reason, but she found none. "There is a bolt on the top of the door," he told her, "and a latch at the bottom. You slide them both, and nobody can get in without waking you." She looked from the door back to him. "You are sleeping in the barn." "That is right. Me and Deputy and 4 horses who will not mind the company." Something in her face changed. It was a tiny shift, but it was there. It was the look of a woman who had been pushed and threatened for months, who was just given something she had almost forgotten, a choice. "Cole," she said. It was the first time she had used his name. He did not make a big deal of it. "If Piton's men manage to find this ranch, it will not be tonight. This storm is too thick. They will have to wait it out." He picked up his rifle. "That means you are safe for tonight. Get some sleep while you can." He put on his coat and walked to the door. Behind him, James McBride spoke in a quiet voice. "Mister?" Cole stopped. The boy was still sitting right beside his sleeping sister, his back straight as a board. His eyes were dark and careful, much older than they should be. "You are going to stand watch," James said. It was not a question. "Yes, son, I am." James nodded slowly. He looked at his mother, then back to Cole. "My father used to stand watch," he said, "when he found something that was worth protecting." Cole did not say a word. He opened the door, and the blizzard rushed in, cold and sharp, for a second. Then he was gone, and the door shut behind him. He heard the bolt slide home, then the latch at the bottom, just like he had told her. He stood on the porch in the white darkness and took a deep breath. Inside that cabin, Eleanor McBride was holding her dead husband's notebook close, 8 months pregnant, and on the run for 4 days. Her 2 children were sleeping behind her. She was alive because a 13-year-old dog had decided to pull on a leash. Cole looked out at the wall of falling snow and thought about the 7 names that had been erased from a report. He thought about Thomas McBride, a man who spent 3 months finding the families of those men. He thought about how a man can walk away from something and tell himself for 2 years that it was enough. He tightened his grip on the rifle and took his post at the corner of the porch. From there he could see in both directions, and he stood watch, the way a man does when he's protecting something precious. The snow kept coming down, trying to cover up everything that had ever happened, trying to make the world new again. But it does not work that way. Cole knew that better than anybody. Under all that clean white snow, the proof was still there, right where it had been buried. And come morning, a woman who refused to grieve quietly was going to help him dig it all back up. He made it until 2 in the morning before the cold finally drove him inside the barn. It was the kind of cold that gets deep in your bones and makes a man's hands slow. And slow hands on a rifle are no good to anyone. He stomped the snow off his boots and went in quiet. The cabin was dark and quiet when he walked in. Eleanor sat at the table under the low light of a lantern, her pencil scratching across a notebook. She didn't bother to look up. He said, "I thought I told you to get some sleep." She answered flatly, "I am making a copy, in case they find the first one." Cole just stood there in the doorway watching her. That pencil never stopped moving. Her handwriting was neat and small, the kind that was drilled into a schoolteacher. She was writing down names, a long column of them, each with a number next to it. He took off his coat and sat down at the far end of the table. "Thomas teach you that?" he asked. "Make copies." The pencil paused for just a second. "Thomas taught me a lot of things," she said. "He always said powerful men do not destroy the evidence. They destroy the people who have it." She turned a page. "So I am making sure more than one person has it." Cole watched the fire settle down to glowing coals. The cabin grew still, the kind of quiet that only happens in the dead of night. "How long were you a teacher?" he asked her. She finally looked up, sizing him up for a moment. "Since I was 19, first in St. Louis, then a private school." She went right back to her work. "How long have you been asking questions you already know the answers to?" He leaned back. "Occupational habit." "Well, you're not a detective anymore," she said. "You can just ask what you want to know." As the chair creaked, the boy, James, shifted in his sleep, putting an arm over his little sister. It was a movement his body knew by heart. "Those men on the ridge," Cole said, his voice steady. "The way they moved was a sweep formation. A man does not just figure that out in the dark." "How long have they been on your trail?" Eleanor's pencil stopped. When she looked at him this time, her guard was down a little. She was deciding what to tell him. "Since St. Louis," she said. "It started the week after Thomas died. I found his notebook tucked inside a ledger at his office. They had already been through the apartment," she continued. "They were professionals. Nothing looked out of place, but Thomas had told me, if anyone ever tosses this place, check the sugar tin and the lining of my winter coat." She paused. "I found 3 different parts of his notes. He had been hiding them for months." Cole stayed quiet. "He knew," she said, her voice dropping lower, heavier. "He knew they were coming for him. He left me a letter, folded up with the papers. It told me where to run, who I could trust, and how to disappear. He told me to take the children and not look back." Her jaw clenched. "He wrote it like he had all the time in the world, knowing he was about to die." "He loved you," Cole said simply. "He was a practical man," she replied. But the way she said it, he knew she understood that Thomas McBride was both. Cole got up and added a couple of logs to the fire, mostly to have something to do with his hands. When he sat back down, she was writing again. "The names on the left," he stated. "Those are the buyers. The inspectors paid to say the Colville mine shaft was safe, 6 weeks before it came down." She did not look up. "The column on the right is how much they were paid. The bottom shows the dates." She pushed the book toward him. "Thomas checked everything." Cole looked at the page. The numbers were exact. These were not guesses. He froze. "That third name," he said. "Harlan Driscoll, the county sheriff." She just watched his face. You know him? He is the sheriff of this county, Cole said, leaning back hard. He was out here 2 months ago over a fence line dispute. I spoke with him for 20 minutes. He saw the number, $400, paid out 8 months before the collapse. They were buying off the law before the first corner was even cut. It was not just a company saving money on safety. It was a planned web of corruption from the very start. Your shoulder, he said, changing the subject. That fall you took from the wagon. He hesitated, not wanting to ask, but he had to. Are you certain the baby is all right? Eleanor went completely still. She looked at him with a raw, unguarded expression. For the first time, he saw the woman behind the fierce determination. I do not know, she said, and it cost her dearly to admit it. Have you felt any movement since then? Yes. Not as much as before, but yes. Then it is most likely fine, he said, keeping his tone matter-of-fact. The cold slows everything down. He looked her in the eye. If that changes, you tell me. She picked her pencil back up. I am not stubborn about things that matter. You are plenty stubborn about the right things, he said. A hint of a smile touched her lips. Thomas used to say I had the stubbornness of a woman who had been told no so many times she had just stopped hearing the word. He had the stubbornness of a woman who had been told no so many times she did not even hear the word anymore. Cole almost cracked a smile. He sounds like he was a smart man. Smarter than me in a lot of ways, she said, turning another page. He was smarter about people. He could tell within the first 5 minutes if someone was worth his time. She did not look up, but the feeling in the room changed. He would have trusted you. Cole was quiet. How do you know that? Because he kept your name. She finally looked up, her gaze direct and certain. Thomas McBride did not keep the names of men he did not believe in. He had very little space in his files, and he was very particular about who he put in them. She held his gaze. Your name was on the second page of the first section, right after the 7 men from Coleville. She paused. He put you with the victims, not with the witnesses. The fire crackled. Outside, the blizzard was settling in for the long haul. It was the kind of storm that does not try to break you all at once, but just stays until you finally give up. But Cole did not give up on things. It was the one true thing about him. I need to tell you something, he said, about Coleville. You do not owe me anything. Yes, he said, I do. He let her finish, waiting for the sound of the pencil to stop. When I put together that first report, he began, his voice low, I had everything locked down. I had pictures of the shoddy shaft supports. I had sworn statements from 3 miners who got out alive, and they told me exactly who ordered them to make the cuts. I even had the inspection papers, signed by 2 of the men who died. He nodded toward the notebook. It was more than enough to put Piton out of business for good. Eleanor sat as still as a stone. My supervisor told me to back off. He said it was being handled by folks higher up, that I just needed to file my report and trust the system. His jaw clenched tight. I trusted it. I handed over every last thing. 3 weeks go by, and he brings me a new report to sign, completely clean. Said my proof was inconclusive. There was a note at the bottom saying if I wanted to keep my job, I'd sign it. And you walked, she stated. I walked, he confirmed. He told myself it was the right move. I didn't sign the lie, so my hands were clean. But I grabbed my files on the way out. I locked them up, came to Montana to raise horses, and tried to convince myself that walking away was enough. The words came out steady, carrying the weight of something he'd held inside for 2 years. But it wasn't enough, he said. 7 men were still dead. Piton kept on digging, and I just found a quiet place and hid from it all. Eleanor watched him for a long, quiet moment. Where are the files? She asked. He met her gaze. The documents, the pictures, the testimonies, all of it. Where? She pressed, leaning forward. In a cedar chest, under my bed. The look on Eleanor McBride's face wasn't victory, and it wasn't relief. It was the look of a woman who had been carrying an impossible burden for 8 months and had just discovered she wasn't carrying it alone anymore. "Cole," she said, her voice steady. "Your files and Thomas's notebook. That's enough to hang him." "Yes," Cole said. "I know." They looked at each other, the lantern burning between them. Outside, the blizzard raged. But inside, something had changed. The load they were carrying was just as heavy, just as dangerous. But now it was shared. And that changes what a person can do. From the darkness by the wall, a small voice said, "How long have you been awake?" It was James. "A good while," the boy answered, sitting up. His voice was careful, not like a child, but like someone who had learned to measure his words. "I heard what you said about Cléville." "James," Eleanor warned softly. "He should know, Mama," James said, his tone certain. "He's helping us. He ought to know what he's getting into." Cole looked at the 8-year-old boy, a boy who already understood that a fair deal means laying all your cards on the table. Thomas McBride's son, through and through. "What do you want to know?" Cole asked him. James thought for a moment, thorough as always. "The men who are following us," he said. "Are they going to come here?" "Not tonight. This storm is too much. In the morning, maybe." "What about the sheriff in your notebook?" He looked toward his mother. "He's the sheriff here," she confirmed. "So we can't go to him." "No." James took that in. "But you know other people," he said to Cole. "People Piton doesn't own." "I know one man," Cole replied. "A federal marshal named Garrett. He's 3 days east from here in good weather." He paused. "The weather's not good, but I can send him a wire from Copper Falls, provided Driscoll hasn't gotten to the telegraph operator." Cole looked at Eleanor. "That's the first move. At first light, I'll ride to town and send that wire. And come back before Piton's men can regroup," James finished. "That leaves us alone." "James," Eleanor started. "I am not complaining," the boy said. "I am assessing." He looked at Cole with serious eyes. "What do we do if someone comes while you're gone?" Cole leaned forward, meeting the boy's gaze in the dim light. He gave him the truth because that's what the boy was asking for. "There is a rifle under the bed," he said. "It is loaded. Your mother knows how to use it." He glanced at Eleanor, and she gave a single firm nod. "If anyone knocks on that door, you do not answer. You take your sister to the back wall, and you let your mother handle the door." He held the boy's eyes. "Your job is your sister, just like it has been. You understand?" James stared back for 3 solid seconds, then nodded. "Go back to sleep now," Eleanor said gently. James laid back down, his arm automatically going across his sister Clara. Within minutes, his breathing was deep and even. Cole was amazed at how the boy could just turn off his worry and sleep, like a soldier in a war who knew you had to rest when you could. Eleanor watched her son, her face a mixture of pride and sorrow for the little man he had been forced to become. Cole didn't look away from her. He figured she wouldn't want him to pretend he hadn't seen the pain in her eyes. "He is only 8 years old," she said quietly. "I know. He was 6 when Thomas started running into trouble at the mine. He has been watching me be afraid for 2 years." She touched the pencil. "And he has never once let me see him be afraid." "He is afraid," Cole said. "He has just decided it is not useful." "That is what I'm saying," she whispered. "He should not have had to make that decision." Cole didn't argue. She was right. He stood up and went to the cedar chest. He knelt and lifted a false bottom he had built long ago, a holdover from his Pinkerton days. He took out a packet wrapped in oilskin and tied with twine. It was untouched from the day he'd carried it out of the Chicago office. He placed it on the table. Eleanor looked at the files, then at him. "Are you sure?" I have been sure for 2 years, he said. I just had not decided to do anything about it. She reached out and untied the twine. She opened the oilskin and picked up the first photograph. He watched her face as she studied the supports, the cuts in the timber where bracing had been taken out to save a little money. She looked at it with a sharp, quick attention, taking in the whole picture before focusing on the pieces. Then she turned to the testimony pages and began to read. She read for the better part of an hour without a word. Cole put more wood on the fire and made her a cup of hot water. She drank it without ever looking up from the pages. Outside, the deep black of the blizzard began to change to the gray-blue that comes before a winter dawn in Montana. When she finished, she set the last page down. His name, she said, her hands flat on the table. The foreman who ordered them to remove the bracing, Marcus Hole. Yes, he is in Thomas's notebook. She didn't look up. He is still working for Piton. He runs the new operation north of Billings. She pressed her hands against the table. He gave that order, 7 men died, and now he is supervising 300 more workers. I know, Cole said. She looked at him then. This has to end. Yes. I mean all of it, she said. Not just Piton in a courtroom, Hall, Driscoll, every single name on that list, all of it. That is what federal courts are for, he told her. That is why we need Garrett. She was quiet for a second. Then, Cole, what if Garrett has been bought too? It was the right question. The one a person asks when they have seen just how far the corruption goes. He might be, Cole said honestly. But I have watched Garrett work for 12 years. I have never seen him take a dollar that was not his, and I have seen men try. He met her eyes. Some people are not for sale. Not because they are saints, but because they are too angry to be. Garrett had a brother die in a mine collapse in Pennsylvania, and he has been angry about it since 1869. Piton would have to offer him a whole lot more than money to buy that man. Eleanor held his gaze, and he saw something settle in her. It was not peace, but the quiet that comes after a hard decision is finally made. Send the wire at first light, she said. She picked up the pencil and went back to her work. Cole leaned back in his chair and kept watch. He watched the sleeping children, the steady fire, and the papers spread across the table like the pieces of something broken that was finally being put back together. For 2 years, they had each been holding one half of the same story, never knowing the other was out there. Cole hadn't slept, but he didn't feel the need. Something deep inside him that had been rusted shut for years was finally starting to grind back to life. It wasn't a good feeling. It was the ache of a broken thing learning to work again. As the first hint of gray dawn touched the sky, he reached for his coat. Eleanor looked up. I'll be back in a couple of hours, he said. She gave a single nod. Cole, she stopped him. The telegraph man in Copper Falls is named Everett Kane. He's 60 years old. His daughter's husband got run out of town by Piton's foreman for complaining about safety in the mines. She looked him dead in the eye. Piton does not own him. Tell him Eleanor McBride sent you. He'll understand. Cole just looked at her. Thomas, he said. Thomas, she confirmed. Her husband knew everyone. Cole put on his coat, grabbed the rifle by the door, and took one last look at the table. There sat Eleanor McBride, 8 months pregnant, her back straight as a board in the dim Montana morning, her pencil still moving. 2 sleeping children were behind her, and her dead husband's work was laid out before her like a road map she planned to follow right to the very end. He opened the door, and a wall of cold hit him. Without looking up, Eleanor said, "Don't let Driscoll see you." "No, ma'am." He stepped out and pulled the door shut. He heard both bolts slide home behind him. He stood for a moment in the pale light. The snow was deep and quiet, making the world look clean. He thought about a foreman named Hall and a sheriff named Driscoll. He thought about some man in Billings who'd been buying off safety inspectors since 1875, calling dead miners accidents. He thought about Thomas McBride writing last instructions to his wife, knowing his time was running out. And he thought of 7 names, written and erased and carried in secret by 2 different people for 2 long years. He walked to the barn, saddled his horse, Pepper, and rode toward Copper Falls. The world looked pure, but it was all a lie. Everett Kane was already at his desk when Cole walked into the telegraph office. That meant he hadn't slept either. News travels fast in a small town, not over wires, but in whispers between neighbors who know how to watch without being seen. The old man looked up, a coffee cup in his hand. He had the look of a man expecting company he wasn't sure he wanted. Cole shut the door, dripping melted snow on the floor. "Eleanor McBride sent me," he said. Everett Kane put his cup down. A look of recognition crossed his face. He was a man who'd been waiting for a knock on a door he'd held open in his mind for months. "Sit down," Kane said, "and keep your voice down. Driscoll's deputy sleeps right across the street, and that fella's got big ears." Cole sat and told him everything that needed to be said. He spoke of the woman, the children, the notebook, and the urgent need to wire Marshal Garrett in Billings before Peaton's crew figured out where Eleanor was hiding. Kane listened without a word, taking it all in. When Cole finished, Kane picked up his pencil. "Garrett's not in Billings," he said, and Cole froze. "He came through here 4 days ago, heading north. The storm has him stuck at Ridgeline Station." Kane was already writing as he spoke. "I got a wire from their operator yesterday. Garrett's pinned down just like the rest of us. But he's only 2 hours north, not 3 days east, and he's been itching for a reason to move." Kane paused. "I might have mentioned to the Ridgeline operator that some things of federal interest were happening down here." Cole stared at him. "You knew about Eleanor." "I knew a woman was being hunted on the East Ridge 2 nights ago," Kane said, still writing. "I have been waiting for someone to walk through that door with a name I knew." He tore the page off his pad. "This gets to Garrett in 5 minutes. If he leaves at first light, he can be here before noon." "What about Driscoll?" Cole asked. Kane's voice turned hard as iron. "He thinks he monitors my lines. For 8 months he's gotten a perfect copy of my logs, minus the parts that matter. My daughter's husband was a good man who asked one too many questions. Some of us," he said, holding Cole's gaze, "don't have the choice to just run off to Montana, Mr. Hargrove." Cole took the truth of that without flinching. "Send the wire," Cole said. Kane sent it. Cole was back at the cabin within the hour. He knocked twice, paused, then knocked 3 more times. The bolt slid back, and Eleanor opened the door, her rifle held ready at her side. She looked at him, her question unspoken. "Garrett is 2 hours north, stuck at Ridgeline," he said. Kane got a wire to him. "He should be here by noon." A flicker of something crossed Eleanor's face, gone as fast as it came. "Kane knew," she said. "He's been waiting." She stepped aside to let him in. The cabin was different. The files and notebook were gone. Her son James was at the window, staring south with a steady gaze. Her daughter Clara sat on a blanket, munching on a biscuit. "There's a man at the south tree line," James said, his voice level. "Been there about 20 minutes, just watching." Cole went to the window. The boy was right. A lone figure stood at the edge of the woods, not moving forward, not moving back. "Just one," Cole said. "One that I can see," the boy corrected him. "Just like a trained scout would." Cole looked at Eleanor. "They're waiting for Driscoll," she said. "Or for more men to show up." "Either way," Cole said, "they'll make their move before Garrett gets here. We need to be ready." He looked at James. "You know what to do. Back wall with your sister." "I heard you the first time," James said, not with disrespect, but with simple fact. "James," Eleanor's voice was quiet but firm. "Take Clara to the back room now. I need to talk with Cole, and I need to know you two are safe." The boy nodded, took his sister's hand, and led her to the back room, closing the door behind him. Eleanor turned to Cole. "How many men does Petan have around here?" "I know of 6, he answered, checking his rifle. "But Petan's not one to get his own hands dirty. He sends paper, and when that doesn't work, he sends more men." "The paperwork won't work," Eleanor said. "He has no legal claim on me or Thomas's notebook. He doesn't need it to be legal, Cole said flatly. He just needs it done before Garrett shows up. The grim understanding passed between them. Outside, the man in the trees hadn't moved. The dog deputy stood at the door, coiled and ready. Cole had seen that stillness in him before and knew to trust it. "How's your shoulder this morning?" Cole asked her. "I can manage," she said. "And the baby?" She met his gaze. "Moving more than last night." He felt a wave of relief and pushed it aside for later. "There was something else I didn't tell you," she said, her hands folded. "When Thomas sent the letter telling me where to go, he included another name." She looked toward the door. "He said if I made it to Montana, there was one man who could make our case impossible for a federal court to ignore. He had the proof, the reputation, and the reason to see it through. But Thomas also warned me about another man, a person I was to avoid at all costs." She stopped for a moment. "He wrote down your name." Cole said nothing. She continued. "He wrote it with a clear instruction. He said, 'Find Cole Hargrove. When you see him, tell him Thomas McBride said the men of Cleville are still waiting for their names to be put in a record that will last.'" The fire crackled. The dog's ears twitched. Cole got up and walked to the window. A second man had joined the first one in the tree line. They were not coming closer, but they had spread out, using the trees for cover in a way that looked serious now. "They're positioning," he said. Eleanor was right beside him. She saw them too. "How long?" he asked. 10 minutes. Maybe not even that." He turned around. "The files, where are they?" "In the same spot you left them." She went to the cedar chest, knelt, and lifted its hidden bottom. He saw his oilskin bag next to the notebook and the copies all tucked away in the dark. She put the board back and stood. "They will not find it if they search quickly. I am not worried about a quick search." He grabbed the rifle. "Eleanor," she looked at him. "I need you to do something that will feel all wrong." She crossed her arms, her face showing she was listening but making no promises. "When they get here, and they are coming, I need you to let me be the one to answer the door. Do not stand behind me with that rifle. Let me handle the front. Trust me to hold them off until Garrett gets here. And if he is not on time, I will hold them off anyway. With what power? You are just a rancher. I have the original Cleville papers, a witness statement, and your husband's notebook right here in this house. And when Marshal Garrett walks in, everything in this building is federal evidence. Anyone who tried to get it becomes a federal problem." He looked straight at her. "But that only works if we are all still here when he arrives." Eleanor stared at him for a good long while. You could see her thinking it all through the way careful people do. "All right," she finally said. She moved to the back room. "James." The door opened right away. The boy had been waiting. "Come here." James walked to her. Eleanor knelt down and put her hands on her son's shoulders. "I need you to listen to me." "I always listen," he said. "I know," she replied, her voice low and steady. "The men who hurt your father are outside. They want the things in that chest. They will not get them. Cole will see to that. But you have to stay in the back room with your sister and keep her calm. You have to trust me." James looked from his mother to Cole. "The marshal is on his way," Cole told him. 2 hours, maybe less. We just need to wait." The boy took this in. He was 8 years old, figuring things a boy his age should never have to. Then he stood up a little straighter, a look Cole recognized. He gave a firm nod. "Do not let them inside," James said to Cole. "No, sir," Cole promised. James returned to his sister and shut the door. The knock came about 12 minutes later. It was a hard, official knock, the kind from a lawman or someone acting like one. Cole was already there. Eleanor was at the table with her hands in plain sight. The rifle was propped against the wall 6 feet away, close enough to be useful but not to seem like a threat. Cole opened the door. Sheriff Harlan Driscoll stood there with 2 men. He wore the look of a man given a bad job who just wanted it over with. He was in his 50s, a big man whose badge glinted in the dim morning. "Morning, Cole." Driscoll's voice was flat, like he was reading from a script. "I have a warrant from Judge Alderman in Billings. It is for a woman named Eleanor McBride, wanted for stealing documents from the Piton Mining Company." He held the paper out, but Cole did not take it. "Have you seen anyone on the road?" Driscoll asked. "A woman, dark hair, pregnant, with 2 children. The road has been closed, Harlan," Cole said. "Blizzard." Driscoll's jaw got tight. "I need to look inside your house." "Do you have a search warrant to go with that one?" Driscoll paused just a bit too long. The men behind him shifted on their feet. "That paper is to take a person," Cole said. "It does not let you search my home. For that, you need a different warrant from a different judge. The closest one not named Alderman is 3 days from here." He stared at Driscoll. "You know the law, Harlan. You have been a sheriff long enough." Driscoll looked back, and Cole saw a man standing at a crossroads. He had to choose between his job and what was right. "Cole," Driscoll said, his voice now quiet, "do not make this difficult. I am not making anything difficult. I am just standing in my own doorway," Cole said calmly. "The real question, Harlan, is what you are about to do." One of the fellows with Driscoll, younger and itching with impatience, took a step. "Sheriff, that warrant says we can." Driscoll cut him off with a sharp tone. "Stand your ground." The man stopped dead. Driscoll looked at Cole, and for a second you could see the shadow of a courage that had been gone a long, long time. "I have a daughter," he said, his voice barely a whisper against the wind. "Piton holds the note on my house. If I do not do this—" "I know," Cole said, cutting him off gently, and he did know. He knew the second he saw Driscoll's name in that ledger, right next to $400. It was dated the same month Driscoll's girl got sick. The doctor bills were real, and the man who offered to pay them did not seem like a monster at the time. "I know how it started, Harlan." A complicated pain crossed Driscoll's face. "A federal marshal is on the road," Cole said. 2 hours away, maybe less. When he gets here, what you do in these next 2 hours will matter a whole lot more than anything you did for the last 2 years. He held the sheriff's gaze. "You know what is in that notebook. You know your name is in it. And you know a federal court will see a big difference between a sheriff who backed away from a bad search and one who kicked in a door." The antsy fella behind Driscoll reached for his pistol. The sound that made him freeze did not come from Cole's rifle. It was Deputy, the old dog who had been silent by the door. He chose that exact moment to step to Cole's side and let out a growl from deep in his chest, a sound that did not belong to a dog of 13 years. The man's hand stopped moving. "Do not," Driscoll said to his man, his voice quiet but solid. It was the voice of a man who had finally made a choice he had been dodging for 2 years. He folded the warrant and put it in his coat. He looked at Cole one last time with an expression that was hard to put a name to. It was not quite shame, and not quite relief. 2 hours, he said. 2 hours, Cole confirmed. Driscoll turned and walked off that porch. He passed his men without a glance, and after a second they followed him. Cole stood there and watched them ride down the south road. Only then did he let out the breath he had been holding. Eleanor was standing just 3 feet behind him. "You heard?" he asked. "I heard." She was holding the rifle, not to threaten, just holding it, his daughter. That is how Piton works. He finds where a man is vulnerable and offers a little help. Then he owns that man forever. Cole closed the door. It is clean. It is patient. And it makes it mighty hard for that man to ever walk away, because he cannot prove his hands are clean anymore. "Thomas wrote about it," Eleanor said. "He called it an architecture of obligation. Piton builds a cage of favors around a person. Then when he needs something, the cage does all the work." She set the rifle down. "Thomas said the only way to tear it down is to make staying inside more painful than leaving." "That is what you just did," Cole said. She glanced at the door. Driscoll could still send a wire to Piton. "He could," Cole agreed, "but he did not search this house when he had the men to do it, and I just had a rifle and a dog. That tells me which way the wind is blowing for him." The back room door opened, and James came out with Clara right behind him. She was calmly finishing a biscuit. "They left?" James asked. Cole nodded. "They left." Clara looked at the dog, then at Cole, and then at her mother. "Deputy was very loud," she said with approval. "He sure was," Cole agreed. Clara went and sat on the floor right next to Deputy, claiming him as her own. The old dog just looked at her with one eye before putting his head back down. Eleanor put a hand on James's shoulder, and the boy leaned into her touch just enough to show how long he had been standing tall on his own. The next 2 hours stretched on longer than any Cole could remember. He fed the horses and walked the property line twice. When he came back in, Eleanor was at the table. For the first time, she was not writing. She was just sitting with her hands around a cup, staring off. "What are you going to do after?" he asked her. She looked up. "After what? After Garrett? After the federal case? After Peaton's name is on a piece of paper that does not get buried in a drawer?" He sat down across from her. "What does Eleanor McBride do then?" She was quiet for a bit, looking at the faint ink stain on her knuckle. "I want to teach," she said. The words came out simple and true. "I want to find a place with children who need a teacher. I want to do what I was doing before Thomas brought me out here. I want Clara to grow up knowing she can read any paper put in front of her. I want James to know that some systems are worth believing in because good people make them that way." "That is a lot of wanting," he said softly. "I have been saving it up," she replied. Cole looked at the woman who had walked through a blizzard, copied evidence all night, and faced down a sheriff without breaking a sweat. "I think Thomas McBride," Cole said slowly, "would have liked knowing you ended up somewhere safe. Somewhere with a good school and a door that locks from the inside." Eleanor met his eyes, her chin moving just a fraction as she held back her feelings. "He would have liked knowing I was not running anymore," she said. Then they heard the sound of hooves on the north road. It was not Piton's crew. This was a steady, purposeful sound, the sound of men who had authority and no reason to hide it. Cole was at the window in a heartbeat. He saw 4 riders and a badge catching the noon sun. Deputy stood up. Clara looked from Cole to her mother, then to the door. "Is that the good man?" she asked. Eleanor crossed to the window. A look washed over her face. Something that had been building for 8 months and 4 days. It was not relief, not yet. It was that feeling you get when you have been holding on for dear life, and you finally realize you can let go and just breathe. "Yes, baby," she said, her voice thick. "That is the good man." Cole opened the door. Marshal Thomas Garrett rode into the yard with 3 deputies behind him. He looked like a man who had ridden hard the moment he got the word. He pulled his horse to a stop and looked past Cole to Eleanor standing in the doorway. "Mrs. McBride," he said. "Marshal," she answered. "I understand you have some documents concerning Peaton Mining Company. I have Thomas's notebook, 2 complete copies, and Cole Harrow's original investigative files," she stated, her voice clear and strong. 73 pages of evidence in total. Garrett looked at Cole. "The original files?" he asked, though it sounded more like a statement. "In the cedar chest," Cole said, "untouched." Garrett swung down from his horse. He was a solid, deliberate man with tired eyes that did not miss a thing. "Then I reckon," he said, stepping onto the porch, "we have some work to do." Cole stepped aside and Marshal Thomas Garrett walked into the cabin. All the proof they needed was right there, waiting. Sometimes doing the right thing means standing up when everyone else stays quiet. And that's a story worth hearing. Inside a cedar chest lay an oilskin envelope holding the names of 7 men from Colville. It also held the story of one brave woman who refused to let their memory fade. Now all that was left was the hard work of making sure those names were never forgotten. Garrett got to work just like Cole remembered good lawmen do. No drama, no grand announcements. He was just steady, thorough, and didn't care how long it took. He sat and read every single page of Thomas's notebook, then Cole's old files, and finally the copies Eleanor had made all night long. He didn't ask a thing, just made notes in his own little book with a pencil he kept in his vest. When he finished a stack, he set it aside neatly and started the next. Meanwhile, little Clara had decided she was in charge of the coffee. She very seriously handed cups to folks 3 times her size, filled with the purpose a child gets when they find their special job. James sat at the other end of the table watching the marshal read with a dark, patient stillness. After about 40 minutes, Garrett looked up right at James. "Your father wrote all this?" he asked. "Yes, sir," James answered. He was an accountant." Garrett looked back down at the page. "He had the mind of a lawyer," he said. It wasn't a compliment or a complaint, just a professional recognizing another's skill. The man had thought of everything. He didn't just write down what happened, he explained why his records could be trusted. He turned a page. "Most folks tell me what they saw. Your father told me what he saw, why he was in a position to see it, and proved the records he copied were real." Garrett paused, then looked at the boy again. A flicker of something crossed the marshal's tired eyes. "He always knew this was headed for a courtroom," James said softly. Eleanor turned from the window. "The names in that third section," she said. "3 of them work at the Billings District Land Office. I've seen them there myself." Garrett didn't even look up from his reading. "Judge Alderman signed Driscoll's warrant this morning." "I know," she replied. "Well," Garrett said, turning another page, "Alderman has been on my list for 14 months. Today he just moved to the top." Cole watched the marshal work. One of the deputies, a young red-headed fella named Fitch, had already posted himself on the porch without being told. Everyone in that room knew Peaton's men were still out there, hidden in the trees. It was a race, and the only question was whose time would run out first. "Mr. Hargrove," Garrett said, finally setting down the last page. He stacked the papers neatly and looked at Cole. "Tell me about the night you wrote that first Coville report." Cole sat down and told him the story straight from start to finish. He talked about the proof he gathered and the night his boss, Harlan Beaumont from the Chicago office, handed him a watered-down version and ordered him to sign it. Garrett listened without a single interruption, his pencil making quiet notes. "Your supervisor, Beaumont, is dead," Garrett said, plain as day. "Happened about 18 months ago, a carriage accident back in Illinois." He let that sink in. "Piton has a man in Chicago who makes sure people who know too much have convenient accidents." He looked straight at Cole. "Your original report connects the Chicago office to what's happening in Montana. That gives us a federal conspiracy charge that overrules any local judge Peaton has in his pocket." The room was still. Eleanor spoke from the window. "So you've been building a case?" "For 16 months, Garrett confirmed. "I had pieces. Corrupt inspectors. A few too many accidents to be a coincidence." He looked at her. "What I was missing was the blueprint, something that showed how it all connected." He gently tapped Thomas's notebook. "Your husband gave me the blueprint." Eleanor's hands were tight at her sides. "He died for it." "Yes, ma'am, he did," Garrett said, not softening the blow. "And what he built is going to tear down this whole rotten structure from the bottom all the way to the top." He paused. "But you need to know what's coming next." "Tell me," she said. "I'm going to arrest Augustus Piton. I have what I need to do it this very day," he explained. "But the moment I do, his lawyers are going to try and tear you apart in court. They will attack your character, your marriage, anything they can think of. They will say your husband made it all up and that you faked these copies." Eleanor walked to the table and placed her hands flat on it, grounding herself. "I was a school teacher for 9 years," she said, her voice steady. "I'm 8 months pregnant. I have been on the run for 4 days, and I spent last night copying 73 pages of evidence by lamplight. I reckon my commitment to the truth will be clear enough." She met his gaze. "What else?" A small, rare smile touched Garrett's lips. "I need you in Billings for the federal hearing, maybe 3 or 4 weeks. And you, Cole," he continued, "I need you to confirm your original report and testify about the night your supervisor tried to bury it." "When are you going after Peaton?" Cole asked. "This afternoon," Garrett replied, standing up. "I want to be in his main office before his men in the woods can warn him." He turned to them. "I'm leaving Deputy Fitch and Marshal Reyes here with you. Nobody is getting near this cabin as long as 2 federal badges are on that porch. Clara, who had been listening to every word, looked up at the tall marshal. "Are you going to put the bad man in jail?" she asked. Garrett looked down, a little unsure how to talk to a child, but doing his best. "Yes, miss, I am," he said. "Good," Clara announced, as if the matter was now closed. She turned back to her duties. Garrett gathered the papers carefully. He held the key to justice right there in his hands, all thanks to a good man's courage and a good woman's strength. He put the copies, each wrapped in oilskin, inside his coat. It was a familiar motion, the kind a man develops after carrying important papers for 12 years. He knows the safest place is right next to his heart. As he reached the door, Eleanor spoke. "Marshal." He stopped. "There is a man named Marcus Holt," she said. "He is running Peaton's operation north of Billings. He was the one who ordered the bracing removed at Cliville." Her voice was level and direct. "He is still out there giving orders. 300 men were in that mine." Marshal Garrett turned back. "He is mentioned in the notebook," she said. "Page 14. It shows payments from Peaton to Holt, dated 6 weeks before the mine collapsed. The payment was for, and I quote, operational adjustments." She met the marshal's gaze. Thomas was sure that was Peaton's way of saying they were cutting corners on safety. "It was," Cole added. 3 miners who survived said the very same thing. They were told they were just making operational adjustments. Garrett pulled out a small notepad and wrote for about 15 seconds. Then he looked up. "I will have a deputy at the north shaft by morning." He paused. "Thank you, Mrs. McBride." "You should thank Thomas," she said. Garrett put on his hat and walked out. They could hear him giving quiet orders to his men. A deep quiet settled on the cabin after the horses headed south. What was started couldn't be stopped now. James looked over at his mother. He asked her, "Is it over?" Eleanor looked from the door back to her boy. She took a moment, choosing her words with care, unwilling to offer him a lie for comfort. "The worst of it is nearly done," she said. "What's coming next will be hard in a different way." James thought on that. He said, "You'll have to tell it all in court." "Yes." The boy gave a slow nod and looked at Cole. "Will you be there?" Cole took in the boy, the woman, the sleeping dog, and the little girl who had claimed him. He thought of the notebook that had been the heart of it all. "Yes," he said, "I will be there." James gave one firm nod and went back to his sister. The afternoon dragged on. Fitch was 22 from Ohio, raised with good manners that he aimed to keep, even way out here. He offered to help Cole with the horses, and they worked in the barn for an hour while the young man talked. He wasn't nervous, just steady, filling the big silence. He spoke of the Garrett case, of being made a deputy 6 months ago, and about his brother back in an Ohio mine he wrote to each week. Cole listened, thinking how Fitch's brother worked in a mine, and here Fitch was, riding for a marshal trying to make those mines safer. The boy likely hadn't put those two things together yet, but he would one day. Back inside, Eleanor sat at the table with Thomas's notebook open. She was looking at the back pages, where his personal notes were written in a looser hand. She closed it gently when they came in, not hiding it, just putting away something private. "Clara's asleep again," she said. "James is reading." She looked at Cole. "You have a surveying book from 1871. It was my father's. James has been reading it for 2 hours. He's asked me 4 questions about measuring land that I can't answer." A hint of warmth was in her voice. "He might end up a surveyor or a lawyer." Cole said, "That boy thinks like a lawyer. He thinks like Thomas." She said his name without the usual flatness, like he was gone but not far off. Cole sat across from her. Fitch was outside, standing his post. South of them, Garrett was riding toward justice with a dead man's truth. "Can I ask you something?" Cole said. Eleanor met his gaze. "The night on the ridge. You had that knife stuck in the floorboard before I got there. You were using it to try and stand. He waited. You weren't planning on staying down." "No," she said. "What was your plan?" She was quiet a second. "I was going to get the children headed north. Then I'd draw the men and their lanterns south. I had the rifle. I knew where it landed in the snow. I just needed to get the children far enough away that the men would follow me." Her hands were flat on the table. "I had not figured out the part after that." Cole said, "That's not a plan, that's a sacrifice." It was all I had. She looked right at him, no apology in her eyes. "I had 2 children, a notebook, and men 30 yards away. You work with what you've got. You work with what you've got." Cole said it back to himself, soft-like. He looked at the cedar chest. "Thomas wrote you a letter on how to survive this. You memorized it and did everything he said. But when the road ran out, you were on that ridge with a busted wagon, and you started making your own instructions." Eleanor just watched him for a long moment. What else was I supposed to do? It was a real question. "Nothing," Cole said. "There was nothing else to do. I am not saying you were wrong. I am saying I saw it. I want you to know I saw it. People do brave things in the dark when no one's watching. Later, they forget what it cost when the world feels normal again." "But it was not small," Cole said. "What you did on that ridge, what you have done these past 4 days, what Thomas did for 2 years, none of it was small. And I wanted someone to say that out loud before the courthouse makes it law and the papers make it history." He held her gaze. "It was extraordinary. You are extraordinary. Thomas McBride knew it when he married you, and he knew it when he wrote down how to get you through this. He knew you had it in you." Eleanor was quiet for a long while. It was the quiet of a person who has finally been allowed to set down a heavy burden. "He used to say," she said, "that I was the only person he knew who was more scared of failing at what mattered than of the fight itself." She looked at the closed notebook. "He said it like it was a good thing. It took me a long time to see that he was right." Cole said nothing, letting the silence hold the weight of it all. Outside, the sky was turning a deep winter blue and the first stars were poking through. Fitch came inside and ate some cold biscuits without a word of complaint. James came out with the surveying book and started asking Fitch questions, determined to learn everything about it. Clara woke up, decided things were all right, and asked for a biscuit too. Cole started making more. It was the most normal the cabin had felt in days, the kind of ordinary that only shows up after you have been through something terrible. The storm is over, the danger is handled for now, the fire is warm, and the coffee is hot. Eleanor sat at the table drinking her coffee. She was not planning or writing. She just watched her children. Every now and then she would look over at Cole, and he was starting to understand the look in her eyes. It was not just one thing, but a quiet strength that had found a safe place to rest. "I was on my own for so long, and now I am not. I am not sure what that means yet, but I'm paying attention." He understood that look because he felt a bit of it himself. Later, after the children were asleep and the deputies were on watch, Cole sat on the cold porch. He thought about Billings, about federal court, and about finally telling the whole story of Claville on the record. He wondered if he was ready, but then he realized it did not matter if he was ready. It just had to be done. That was decided the moment a woman, who had every reason to give up, chose to fight instead. The door opened behind him. Eleanor came out wearing her coat, moving with the slow care of a woman 8 months pregnant. She stood by the railing and just looked up at the stars. They stayed that way for a time, sharing a silence that said more than words ever could. It is the kind of quiet 2 people can have only after going through something so big that talking about little things would feel plain wrong. "3 weeks in Billings," she said at last. "3 weeks," he agreed. "After that?" she asked, looking at the stars, more thinking out loud than asking him. He had noticed she did that. The men on the ridge weren't just thugs, they were thieves in expensive coats. Eleanor's revenge wouldn't be loud or violent. It would be quiet and lasting. It would be the simple act of living well. Cole listened to her whole story under the clear, star-filled sky. "You know," he said, looking out at the night, "the town of Copper Falls has had an empty schoolhouse for 8 months. They've been looking all over for a teacher." She looked at him, and for the first time he saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Mr. Hargrove," she said, her voice steady, "are you telling me about a job, or are you telling me I found a place to stay?" "I reckon I'm telling you both," he said with a small smile. "And I'm letting you decide." In that quiet moment, under the endless Montana sky, Eleanor McBride knew she had stopped running. She had found a home. The lesson here is simple, folks. Sometimes the greatest courage is just surviving one more day, and the greatest kindness is offering a stranger a little bit of warmth in the middle of a storm. She told him her husband had written to her. He said if they had a girl, he wanted to name her after the first honest thing that came along after all the lies. She looked at Cole, her voice barely a whisper. He wrote that hoping for the truth, not knowing if it would ever come. For 8 long months, this woman had run on nothing but grit and a stubborn refusal to fail. Cole saw the woman who was about to walk into a federal courthouse and finally speak the truth where it mattered most. "What was the name?" he asked her. "Verity," she said. "It means truth." A cold, clean wind blew down from the snow-covered hills, carrying that deep Montana silence. It was a silence full of promise, of things buried and waiting to be found again. "That is a good name," Cole said. Eleanor glanced at the stars one last time before turning to go inside. As Cole held the door, the warmth from the cabin rushed out to greet them. Inside, the fire was burning steady and the children were sound asleep. The notebook, filled with truth, rested safely in a chest. 4 days later, the roads had cleared enough for them to leave for Billings. Peyton had been arrested at his office. He gave up without a fight, which was a disappointment. A man responsible for so much wrong should have put up more of a struggle. Holt was taken into custody at the North Mine Shaft, and the 300 workers were all sent home with their pay. The morning before they set out, Sheriff Driscoll rode up to the ranch. He came all by himself with no badge pinned to his coat. He stood on the porch, turning his hat in his hands, looking like a man who had finally faced his own past. "I need to speak with Mrs. McBride," he said quietly. Eleanor came to the door and just stood there waiting. "I knew about the notebook," Driscoll confessed. "I knew Thomas McBride was keeping records, and I knew Piton wanted them. When they told me he had an accident, I filed their report. I did not ask the questions I should have." He looked her straight in the eye. "I am sorry, Mrs. McBride, for all of it." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, weighing his words. "Did you have a choice?" she finally asked. "Not a good one," Driscoll admitted. "But I had one." "Then I accept your apology, Sheriff," she said. "And I suggest you tell the federal court exactly what you just told me. A man who makes a bad choice and then tells the truth about it is different. The court will see that." Driscoll nodded, put on his hat, and rode away. Cole came and stood beside her in the doorway. "That was generous of you," he said. "It was accurate," she replied. "There is a difference." The trip to Billings took them 2 days. Cole rode alongside the wagon, watching over them. On the second evening, with the town lights twinkling in the distance, Eleanor spoke without warning. "Thomas asked me to marry him in a schoolhouse." Cole looked over at her. "He had come to fix the stovepipe. It took him 3 visits over 2 weeks to get it right," she said, a warmth in her voice that was like a banked fire. It was the sound of a memory that had been protected and kept alive through the hardest of times. It was the sound of why she had fought so hard. It felt like a memory that was both a comfort and a hurt, the kind you can't quite put a name to. On his 3rd visit, he'd admitted he was making things worse between trips, just so he'd have an excuse to return. She stared at the town lights up ahead. "I told him that was the sorriest excuse for a courtship I had ever heard. He said efficiency was never the point. The point was just to be there." After a beat, she added, "He was there every single day for the rest of his life." Riding beside her, Cole said quietly, "Sounds like a man who deserved to have his work finished." she corrected him gently. He is. The next morning in Billings, Garrett met them with 2 deputies, his face tight with bad news. It was clear the 3 weeks they thought they had were gone. Piton's lawyers moved to dismiss the case yesterday, Garrett said. Right to the point. They're claiming Thomas McBride's papers were his personal property, taken without a warrant and can't be used. He looked straight at Eleanor. They plan to argue that the copies you made are fakes. Then I will recite the originals from memory, Eleanor stated, line by line if I have to. Garrett just stared, looking like a man holding a lit stick of dynamite, trying to figure the fuse. The hearing was set for the day after tomorrow. Good, she said, her voice steady as a rock. I have been ready for 8 months. The federal courthouse in Billings was the kind of place that meant business, all stone columns and heavy doors, built to look like it would last forever. Cole had been in courtrooms before, and was never much bothered by them. What got to him this time was the feeling in the air when Eleanor McBride walked in. Every eye was on her, the lawyers in their fancy suits, the judge on his high bench, and a whole gallery of folks who'd heard whispers and came to see the truth for themselves. She walked in with her back straight, wearing a simple dark dress bought with the last of Thomas's emergency money. You could see the callus from her pencil and the ink on her knuckle, and there was no hiding that she was carrying 8.5 months of a child. She took the witness stand like a woman who knew exactly where she belonged and had no plans of leaving. Paton's lawyer was a fellow from Chicago named Voss. He was expensive and carried the smooth confidence of a man who'd been making witnesses doubt their own names for 20 years. He let Eleanor talk for a whole hour, telling her story about Thomas, the notebook, and the copies. Then he stood up, looking at her with the practiced patience of a man who thinks he's got an easy fight on his hands. Mrs. McBride, Voss began, you say you read these original ledgers, but you have no formal training in the law. How can we trust your reading of accounting papers you are not qualified to understand? I taught mathematics and composition for 9 years, Eleanor replied. I know how to read a column of figures, and I know how to read a contract. The papers I read didn't need a law degree. They just needed literacy and attention. She met his gaze. I have both. But your copies were made from memory, you said. From the notebook I held in my hand, and from memory where the pages were torn, she clarified. She reached into her folder and pulled out a sheet. I can prove it. Hand me any page from the original ledger, and I will tell you what it says before you even open it. A low murmur spread through the courtroom. Voss glanced at the page, then at his own table, then to the judge. That will not be necessary, Voss said quickly. I think it might be, Judge Forsythe said from the bench, his tone mild. He looked like a man who had been waiting his whole career for a case just like this one, and he was not about to be rushed by some high-priced lawyer from back east. Voss chose a page from Paton's ledger. He read a single line from it. Eleanor repeated it back to him word for word, even adding the date from the top corner and the account number from the bottom. Voss grabbed another page. She recited that one too, right down to 2 little notes in the margin that Voss himself had to search for. The murmur in the gallery grew louder. Mrs. McBride, Voss said, and his voice was different now, not rattled, but changed. It was the sound of a man who just realized his map of the trail was all wrong. Your husband, by your own account, was emotionally invested in this. Is it not possible his notes show what he wanted to find, not what was actually there? Thomas was an accountant, she said simply. Accountants write down what the numbers tell them. The numbers he wrote down came from Paton's own books, copied with care, and checked against the real inspection reports. She paused, letting her words sink in. If those documents show a foregone conclusion, it was a conclusion, mister. Paton decided on when he wrote the numbers, not when my husband copied them. For the next 40 minutes, Voss tried to trip her up, but Eleanor met him at every turn. She wasn't fighting, and she wasn't emotional. She was just a woman who had lived with these truths for 8 long months and knew them better than she knew herself. Then it was Cole's turn to speak his piece. He sat in that same chair, looked out at the same room, and laid out the whole sorry tale of what happened at Cleville. He talked about the real report he wrote and the fake one his boss tried to make him sign. He spoke the 7 names that had been wiped from the record one by one. The courtroom got real quiet, the kind of quiet that happens when something lost has finally been put back where it belongs. The company lawyer, Voss, went at him for a whole hour. But Cole answered every question straight and true, a skill he learned from watching Eleanor. When Voss asked why he stayed quiet for 2 long years, Cole looked right at him. He said, "Because I was wrong. I knew it then, and I know it now. It took seeing a woman drive a knife into a wagon just to get a foothold in a blizzard to make me stand up myself." The whole place was silent enough to hear a pin drop. The next day, Garrett took the stand and unspooled 16 months of hard work. He connected all the dots, the accidents, the payoffs, and the whole rotten system of corruption. Thomas McBride's notebook had drawn the map, and Cole's files had proven it was all true. Garrett spoke for 4 hours, slow and steady, like a man who has waited a long time to have his say and was going to make every single word land. All the while, Piton sat there in a fine suit, looking like a man watching his own house burn down, still trying to figure if he can walk out with so much as a picture frame. Cole had seen that look before on men who build their fortunes on the idea that the folks they hurt are too broken to ever speak up. They were always wrong. The verdict came back on the 5th day. Guilty. Guilty on 11 counts for everything from fraud to criminal negligence. When the verdict was read, Eleanor sat tall between Cole and James, with little Clara asleep on her shoulder. She did not cry or make a sound. Her son James found her hand and squeezed it tight. She just sat there, with her husband's notebook and a bag at her feet, feeling the truth of it all settle in. After a full minute, she let out a long, slow breath, like a woman finally setting down a heavy load she had carried for 8 long months. Outside on the courthouse steps, Garrett came over to them. He shook Cole's hand, then looked at Eleanor with a peaceful kind of satisfaction. He was the man who had brought the dynamite, and now the job was done. "Your testimony was the cornerstone of it all," he told her. "Thomas built the case, but you were the one who delivered it." Eleanor looked him square in the eye. "The 7 men from Cleville," she said. "Will their names be in the record?" Garrett answered without a moment's hesitation. "Every one of them. Their names will be in every document this case produces from this day forward." She gave a single firm nod. "Then it is finished." After Garrett left, young James looked up at Cole and asked, "What happens now?" Cole looked at the boy, at his mother standing beside him, and at the little girl who was now awake and studying the big courthouse pillars. "Now," Cole said, "we go on home." They headed back to Copper Falls in the first week of December, when the snows had come to stay. The old schoolhouse was still standing, just as Cole had promised. It was solid and well built, cold from being empty, but with a good stove and big windows to catch the morning sun. Eleanor walked through it by herself that first afternoon while Cole watched the children. She came back with a list of supplies written in her neat hand on a scrap of paper. She put the list on the table between them. Cole looked it over. "You will need a second bookshelf," he said. "I know. Can you build one?" He nodded. "I can build 2. She looked at him from across the table. The children were in the other room, and the fire was crackling in the hearth. "Cole," she started, and he waited. "You told me once that Thomas showed up every day. I need you to know that is what I need, not a big rescue. Just someone who shows up." He held her gaze steady. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low and sure, "I walked a lame horse 4 miles in a blizzard for you. I stood on a porch with a shotgun for 12 hours. And I testified in a federal court against men who get paid to make honest folks look small." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I reckon I know how to show up." A real smile finally broke across her face, the kind he had only seen in bits and pieces before. It was whole and true. She reached across the table and took his hand, her grip as strong and certain as it was on the courthouse steps. He held on tight. Verity Callahan was born on the 21st of December, the longest night of the year. She came into the world loud and strong, with her mother's dark hair and her father's knack for making sure everyone knew exactly what she wanted. And Cole was the first to hold her. A reason Cole knew how to be. He looked at the tiny red face and clenched fists, thinking of Thomas McBride writing a name on a paper in the dim light, knowing his time was short but trying to leave some truth behind in the world. "Verity," Eleanor said from the bed. Her voice was tired but strong and absolutely certain. "Her name is Verity." Cole brought the baby to her, placing her gently in her mother's arms. Eleanor held her daughter for the very first time, and her face showed the look of a woman who had battled through an impossible 8 months to get to this one single moment. It was not a soft look, but a look of being completely and profoundly present, the way a person is when they have paid for a moment with everything they have. James stood in the doorway, his little sister Clara asleep on his shoulder. He looked at his mother and his new sister with those dark, watchful eyes that had been guarding his family since he was 6 years old. And for the first time Cole could remember, he saw those eyes finally do something new. He saw them rest. Any paper they could understand was a paper that could not be used to trick them. Word travels fast in small places, and by February she had 19 students. By March, the school board was getting letters from other districts, asking just what was happening in Copper Falls to make their children ask so many smart questions. Eleanor McBride, who became Eleanor Hargrove on a quiet Sunday in February, wrote back and told them exactly what was happening. She was teaching them to read everything. Peaton's appeal was denied. Holt's conviction was upheld. Cole built her a second bookshelf in March, and then a third one in April because her collection of books grew faster than anyone expected. She said it was not her fault, and he said it was entirely her fault. And it was the kind of argument that ended in a special kind of laughter, the kind that only happens between two people who have walked through fire together and found each other safe on the other side. The court record was made permanent. The names of the 7 men from the mine were finally written down where they would not be forgotten. The northern shaft was closed for good. Driscoll quit his job as sheriff and went to work at a feed store 1 county over. Thomas McBride's notebook had made sure the whole truth came out. One morning, late in the spring, the snow had finally melted away. The fields were green, and the ranch was alive with the sounds of new horses and happy children. Eleanor sat on the porch steps with a cup of coffee, holding the notebook. She wasn't looking at the evidence pages, but at the last few pages. There, in his own handwriting, was the story of a man writing not for a record, but for himself and for the family he loved. She sat on the courthouse steps, reading in the quiet morning light when Cole came out and sat beside her. She kept the notebook open. "He wrote about you," she said, her voice even. She turned to the last page, written in November, just before everything went wrong. She held it for him to see Thomas McBride's careful handwriting, the kind a man uses when he figures these might be his last words. He wrote that if the worst came to pass, the one man he trusted with the proof and the grit to use it was an old Pinkerton agent named Cole Hargrove, a fellow who walked away from a job rather than sign his name to a lie. Thomas wrote that he did not know how to find Cole, but he sure hoped Cole would find Eleanor. Cole was quiet as a stone for a long moment. "He wrote it," Eleanor whispered. Later, on their own porch, you could hear the world settling back into place. Little Verity, all of 5 months old, was making her demands known from inside. Her big sister Clara, a wise old 6-year-old, answered her with a whole lot of patience. James's boots sounded on the porch boards, but he stopped when he saw his mother with Cole, giving them a quiet minute. Eleanor finally closed the notebook. She held it for a second, the same way she had clutched it through the blizzard and the hearing. Then she set it down on the step, real gentle, not letting it go, just letting herself be. She looked out at the horses in the field. "He found you," she said, not to Cole, not to herself. She just put the words out into the morning air, clear and true. Cole took her hand. Thomas McBride had shown up every single day of his life, right until the day they made sure he could not. But in that notebook, in the good people he trusted. He was showing up still. Some people, Eleanor had once told her students, leave this world with less truth in it than they found. Thomas had left it with more. That was the long and short of it. That was the real truth that would outlast any dusty old courthouse papers. He was a man who kept faith with what was right until his very last moment, and she was the woman who carried that truth the rest of the way home. Between the two of them, they made darn sure that what happened in the dark got dragged out into the light, named for what it was, and set down for good. And that was enough. In fact, that was everything. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.